Hello and welcome back to Divine Dialogue with Dahlia. I'm your host, Dahlia Rose, and we're back joining you just as we always do to bring you expansion, awareness, deepen your spiritual journey, and to give you some things to think about. So today I am here. You're gonna hear me like talk about everybody is probably my favorite person, but they're favorite people for different reasons, and this is one of my favorite behavioral health practitioners, Palesa. And you know, this has been, as she reminded me of a pre-show, this has been a year in the making. We've been trying to get together and do this broadcast for about a year now. And that's not the only precedence. After 21 years of working in the behavioral health field for someone else, Palisa finally has her own business and you'll find her. It's called, I love this, it's called Sit a While and Heal. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Sit a While and Heal behavioral health consultation and services business that she has. It's amazing. She's amazing. And for those of you looking for experience as a social worker, as a behavioral health specialist or person, you're definitely going to want to reach out to her. But I'll let her talk a little bit more about her business. So, Felissa, please let us know who you are.
Oh, okay. Oh, first of all, I'm so happy to be doing this. I'm like cheesing. I'm like, okay, smile, don't smile, smile. Um, yeah. So I made it official. My last day working for the man was July 1, and I effectively July 5th. My new business started, and I had clients already. So
Because you're amazing.
oh, well, thank you. Um, my focus is going to be on clinical supervision for social workers who need to get their hours to become like me, specifically being culturally competent.
Hmm.
And also, I'm going to be doing individual therapy focusing on the BIPOC community, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, because I just see that there's a huge need. A lot of people want providers that look like them or who can connect with their life experiences. So I'm really excited about it. And then being able to help other people who are interested in doing the same thing, um, to just be more competent, and better, more connected as a therapist.
And you're right on the front wave of that. I mean, I feel like it's only been within the last couple of years that we've been able to have these conversations in the Black community about mental health. I mean, you've been a practitioner for so much longer,
Mhm.
and you know, now to be able to be in a position where we have Black and Indigenous people of color coming up through the mental health learning experiences and then taking that into the field, and to have people such as yourself who've been doing it for so long training them. I mean, this is pivotal, it's necessary,
Yes.
it's all the things.
Yeah, it's so funny because I've always been that person who's like, hey, I'm a Black woman. I'm an African woman. I'm a woman. Like, we cannot cut that part out of the conversation when we're trying to support people with mental health. There are people who have come into my office that look like me, but they
Mm,
speak Spanish.
mm,
There's people who um, look like me, but like did not have my life experience. And if we don't take out the time to really get to know each person as they come in,
right.
you miss out on a lot of things. And there's so many nuances with different um, religions, sexual orientation,
Absolutely.
race, that gets lost sometimes in just kind of labeling people based on like them being depressed or anxious.
Mm.
So I don't want that to be missed, and especially with the BIPOC community, there's so many stigmas associated with mental health, and kind of segues into the topic of spirituality and therapy.
Yes, so that is what we are here to talk to you guys about today. Mental health meets spirituality. You know, um, spirituality has re-exploded on the scene within the last couple of years, especially in the beginnings of COVID. Um, People were really trying to find answers, find themselves,
Mhm.
and it seemed like two separate things, mental health piece and spirituality, were kind of stepping onto the stage, but they weren't separate. They never have been separate. In
Yeah.
fact,
Mhm.
what you will find in most clinical texts is that spirituality is something that needs to be addressed, that needs to be clarified for the individual, whether it be spirituality or religion. It's that connective piece that takes you deeper into yourself, that's so very necessary. And you know uh Palis is bringing us a really interesting topic today. I one I hadn't considered myself. But we're here to talk about what did enslaved and indigenous people do to address mental health during their life experiences and some of the atrocities that they had to go through. Mental health is not new. It's as old as we as a species are. And so, Palisa, how did you get onto this topic?
Well, one of the best parts about um, being in the stage I am as a clinician is supporting the next generation of social workers and clinicians. And one of my supervisees brought that up to me, and she said, I've really been thinking about this, and I'm looking at like people of color currently and their struggles with mental health. Right now, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but in the African American community, the second leading cause of death for Black males between the ages of 16 to 26 is suicide.
Mm,
And, these things don't get talked about.
right,
And she was saying, what is it that we're going through right now that that brings us to that point that our ancestors who potentially went through a lot more were able to kind of push through for us to even be here.
right.
And I was like, I love it because this is really getting us to dig deep, because what we're finding is some of these things we've gotten away from as a people, like from diet to the way that we live, does impact our mental health. And
Mm,
I'm glad you said that earlier about the about this whole idea that spirituality and mental health were separate. I always tell people whenever they start working with me, health is three pronged: physical, spiritual, and mental.
right,
And when we are out of balance with one of them, we are not fully healthy. So we
right.
really are spending our existence trying to, there's a seesaw, but there's three things. So like what how do we do that? So it's kind of this perpetual balance that we're trying to find. And I definitely have found when the spirituality piece and the mental health piece are strong, the physical health comes so much easier. So,
Absolutely.
um, so yeah, we talked about that, and I am, and I feel terrible because I don't know the name of the author or the book, so I'm gonna have to get it back to you. But it's a woman. She wrote a book. It's called Black Joy, and she wrote it in response to a lot of the recent um, shootings that have been happening, mass shootings, massacres, actually. And it came from her experience with losing a family member in one of those events. And she
Mm,
was saying, we have to separate the difference between joy and happiness. And
yes.
um, happiness is like this temporary, like, oh, I feel happy, but ultimately joy comes from within, and it's spiritual, and it's just rooted in who you are. So even when you have a terrible moment, you still have joy because it goes much deeper than that. And so she talked about that, and one of the things she mentioned was enslaved people, um, one of the things they came here, they didn't have language because they came from so many different tribes and cultures. And what did they do to connect? They used music, and they
Yes.
used sound. So sometimes just starting off drumming, what does that do? What does it awaken for you? And it's vibrational. So Dahlia, you know what the impact of vibrations. You hear more people saying things like, "Oh, I didn't like her vibe."
Right.
People kind of they don't realize like the power in saying that positively or negatively.
Or the power of their words. I mean, that I think was the start of this reinfusion of spirituality was
Mm-hmm.
the choice of words. And I want to spotlight the author of the book Black Joy. Was It's actually, it seems like it's two authors, Tracy McHale or Michael and Louis Gidgets. So and the it looks amazing as far as the cover. So definitely check that out, and we'll link it
Oh, thank
below.
you. Oh,
Yeah.
perfect.
Google, thank you. um, but the power of words and manifestation, I think, was the largest part of the reinfusion of spirituality on the
Mm,
main scene. And now the power of, like you said, saying things like, I didn't like her vibe, or I just didn't get a good feel from this. And it is, we're re-engaging with our feelings. And I love what you said about the three-pronged approach, because when you do, it I tend to think, it made me think about how goal oriented we can be. And we may not be addressing that spiritual piece
mhm,
that would allow us to finally meet those goals. I mean, in my practice with the healing work, I'm talking to people that will use phrases like "I feel lost,"
mm,
and usually I'm asking questions, and as soon as we get to that piece of, okay, like, what happened to your spiritual practices, and they're like, well, I'm just really tired, and I've just, I don't have time, and work and kids, and it's like, never any shame or judgment around those things,
right.
because I think that life is very much about this revolving door of priorities. But you're absolutely right. When one's off, the others will be as well. You can't have a two-leg chair. You can have three. I mean, it's an iffy chair with three legs, but you can still do it. You know. And so when we look back at our own cultures, there's a lot of power with that. Even down to what I've been seeing a little bit recently is what do how do I want to call it? Cultural appropriation, right?
Mhm,
So there's another leg of this. How did indigenous and enslaved peoples address their mental health concerns? There's another rung to this to say, you don't just have to glom onto shamanism because it is the most present focus, not realizing that if you didn't hail from Russia, um, you're probably not tapping into all that you can of your own background.
right.
One of the things that I love about you, Palissa, is that you come straight from Ghana, and that's not what I love about you, but you have shown me how deeply connected you are to your culture, and you've brought that forward through research. You've brought it through small moments of education that we've had and exchange between each other. They were small, but they were huge,
Mm,
because again, when you anchor into where your family actually came from, I mean, it's okay to be drawn
mhm,
to some cultures and some practices, because maybe, I guess, in my field we'd call those past life ties.
mm,
But you're in this body now.
right.
You're reflecting the circumstances of this creation right now. There's power in that too. There's nothing to run from.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, that gave me goosebumps. Like there's nothing to run from. And I think like as you were talking and you talking about that revolving door, I think that's what this world has become so much about is this kind of this wash, rinse, repeat, but it's not, there's no evolution. So people kind of falling away from their spirituality and their connectedness to who they are at their core, at their root, is very easy because the society kind of dictates it. And
Right.
so when you have all these competing factions, and then kind of going back to like looking at colonial times, like for them, what were they facing that
Mm,
made them kind of instinctually say, if I'm going to survive, I have to stay connected to the divine, however I'm defining it. And I can't speak to this person. I don't have my religious leader anymore. So what
right.
am I going to do? Um, hey, maybe it's within me.
Mm,
And so you think about the humming, chanting, rocking back and forth, like again, all of those things kind of increase your vibrations, and it also awakens. So I'm about to be a nerd here, the vagus nerve. And
right.
that nerve runs from the back of your head all the way into your gut. And that's why there's a lot of people with IBS. And I've
Mhm.
talked to people about it. 90% of people with IBS have anxiety, depression. It's actually a very smaller percentage where it's just rooted in a gastroenterology issue.
Oh,
So
for sure.
sometimes a lot of the doctors will suggest that the person work with a therapist, or they'll give them an anxiety related medication as their first line of treatment before the other stuff.
When I was, let's see, when was I wouldn't, I don't know if I was technically diagnosed, right? But this was before Anthony, and he's 12. So,
Oh, wow.
um, yeah, 12 years ago, meeting with my general health practitioner and saying to them, every time I get in an argument with my significant other, I throw up.
Mm,
And this is only recent, but it seems like a problem more than seems like a problem.
mhm.
And my general practitioner was like, okay, well, we're trying these new things out. Here's antidepressants. And I was like, what? Why? Like, don't I just need Pepto Bismol? What are we
Right.
talking about? And no, it was the solution was antidepressants. And I am absolutely for combining allopathic medicine with holistic treatment. So, never on this show will you hear me tell anybody to get off their meds, because I don't believe in doing that, especially not without the help of a mental health practitioner.
Thank you.
However, knowing myself, I had to monitor my being on it and keep in contact with my provider, who was not a mental, I mean, I'm just, he wasn't a mental health practitioner. His
Yes.
concern was addressing my symptoms. And what I watched unfold was no more vomiting, but this disassociation of self.
Yes.
And I could not connect anymore. There was like this barrier. And I was in church at the time, but I wasn't really in church. It was
Mhm,
the
mhm,
box to be checked. And while I've always had my connection with the divine, it seemed like I had nobody to go
mhm.
to really bridge that gap, be it a spiritual healer or a mental health practitioner, which sometimes, in the case of Palisa, you can find both.
Yes, you
So
can.
there's definitely that what you said drives right home for me, Palisa, because I was missing that piece, and I was missing the practitioner piece as well.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's my mental health journey.
Yeah, and and that's one of the things, kind of going back to the topic of the stigma, is primary care doctors can prescribe those first level, and it's like, oh good, you're not throwing up anymore, but like you said, you're not dealing with what's underneath. So you're not throwing up, but now it's like, I'm not really myself. And it was more of, he's supposed to give it to you refer you to a psychiatrist and a therapist, and then the therapist helps you to then get to the point where you may not need that medication anymore, or the dose can be so low that it's just to manage it, but you still get to be you.
Oh, we
And
didn't get to oscillate between dosages either. It was one.
see, yeah,
Yeah,
because that's not his or her specialty.
right.
And so there is another book. I do remember this author. It is Dr. Judy Orloff.
Oh,
And,
yes.
um, she's a psychiatrist, and she's done a lot of work with empaths and highly sensitive people. And I think people have to start making a difference between being an empath and being highly sensitive.
Yes,
A lot
absolutely.
of people with trauma histories are highly sensitive, but not necessarily an empath. And but she her book really looks at that and talks about how to manage it in this world of sensory and everything else. And one of the things she talked about was empathic people, highly sensitive people. A lot of times they can't manage medication at the same dose
Right.
as the average person. So if you're supposed to, your max dose is supposed to be 200 milligrams, an empath or a highly sensitive person should probably have 75 or
Mm,
100 max. Again, I'm a social worker. I'm not a medical provider. So you still have to work with your medical provider around this, but you can advocate for yourself and have a dialogue about it, about please can we try this with this. And if you have a provider who's like you do it my way or else, then that's not going to work. Now, if the provider says, we've tried it at this dosage for this long and it's not working, this is why I'm considering X, Y, and Z, then
mhm.
you're also supposed to say, okay, but if it doesn't work, what are our other options? So, I know we're kind of hitting on all these different things, but this is part of what makes behavioral health so different from the other health cares, because there is a greater partnership, and you have to be a lot more transparent
Right.
with your providers. You're supposed to be with your medical providers too. But with mental health, like you leaving out that little detail can send your therapist, your provider on this whole other trajectory that ends up not being helpful to you.
And this does relate right back to everything that we're talking about. So, spirituality is a road to self. It's getting to know yourself. It's getting to places where what many of us have had trouble doing, advocating for ourselves. And that's exactly what you're talking about as far as working with your mental health care provider in terms of medications, dosages, assistance, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of this reminds me of what I think is important for marginalized communities to remember is that we do have agency, we do have advocacy for ourselves, and but this goes back to indigenous and enslaved peoples.
Mm-hmm.
They were not asked what was going on, what stressors do you have. It was just, okay, you're having trouble working or you're not producing as much, so either we get rid of you, we treat you, whatever the case is, your property. And so that we have to acknowledge that, as far as not knowing that we have the permission to show up and say, you know these are my needs, this is my understanding of my situation, and to ask for help.
Yes.
So, I mean, again, it's all aligned.
Yeah, it is. And when you were talking, it made me think about like even like white male clinicians. Um, their challenge is people not seeing them in the role of the oppressor,
Mm,
and having to be okay with not taking it personal when a person of color excuse me, comes in to a session and is highly suspicious
right.
and makes statements. You just can't take it personal. You are the one who has to demonstrate to this person that you don't represent this system that has done a lot of damage in the world. And that's part of like with my business that I also want to support people in doing, is just being more culturally competent and having cultural humility, that actually I know who I represent. So I have to work a little harder to build trust and rapport with this individual. Um, so
It seems like a complete juxtaposition as far as why some get into the field, right? Like as far as the medical field's concerned, there's this sense of some get in to serve, others get in for the power of it,
yes,
and and having to address both to say, hey, the field is changing, and here is the best way to navigate that. And if you can't, well, maybe it's time to find another job, in all honesty.
yeah, and it's I've been doing more stats, pulling numbers together, and we have in the state of Virginia, there is a shortage, and my
Hmm.
staff, my former staff, all like have the numbers like drilled into their heads. There's approximately 9 million people in the state of Virginia and 5,000 licensed providers for the entire
Wow.
state. And the last couple of years, Virginia and DC have been ranked 42 and 43 for worst access to mental health care in the country. And then Maryland, which is right next door, is ranked number 5. And then when you look at the number, breaking it down even further, there's 15% of the social workers that are licensed in the state are Black. And then there's almost 40% of clients who are African American seeking services. So you see all of there's all of these disconnects,
Yeah.
um, and so this isn't about oh, it's because I'm white, because it's people need support, they want support, but they also want somebody to know who they are. And sometimes having to retell your story and breaking down like what this means and what that means in the midst of sharing about a trauma is, sometimes people just don't want to do it.
Right.
Um,
And building trust should be okay. It,
mhm.
it should be the first thing that happens between a practitioner and an individual, so that you can alleviate, the imagery of either the oppressor, or the savior, or the person that isn't going to hear what all is going on. And it's a system failure, because if you are part of a practice, you may also be limited by time that you can spend with an individual, and all of that. So this doesn't come down to one race, one practice, one. It's the whole system. It's everything.
Yeah, and the stigma isn't just on the side of the BIPOC communities. The stigma is within the insurance companies.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, a doctor can bill for $250 to the insurance company and will get 80% of it back. Um, I do a 2-hour comprehensive assessment to get to know a new incoming client, bill the insurance company $180 for 2 hours. The insurance companies have been known to pay back $45
Wow.
for two
For
hours.
2 hours.
And then they've also been known to come back and say, ah, you were missing this one extra document we told you about last week, so we're not paying you at all for that session.
Oh my God.
And so what do you do? Do you punish your client for this kind of this capitalistic setup, or do you move forward? And when you do that, do you risk this insurance company then coming back and refusing to pay over and over again? So the stigma, you're so right when you talk about systemic. I have been stalking my senators and congressmen. I've been sending email. What are y'all going to do about that insurance company? Because you keep on bragging about access to mental health. Do you know there's only this many therapists? And and I
Absolutely.
haven't
What we
gotten,
have to do.
yeah, and I haven't gotten a live person. So I'm trying to figure out another way to stalk. But but yeah, the all of these things play into our communities, BIPOC communities accessing mental health, and then it still plays into the stigma, because then it's like, you know what? Maybe I will just maybe I will go to church and pray, and hopefully that'll take care of it. And I'm not saying that prayer doesn't work. I'm not saying that uh using your house of worship for healing isn't effective. What I'm saying is, I saw this video on Facebook years ago, and it was a pastor, and he said, you know, when you have a cavity, do you pray that the cavity will go
Mhm.
away? Um, or do you pray that God guides the hands of the dentist who's going to get that cavity out and make sure that you don't feel the pain of the cavity anymore?
Absolutely.
So why wouldn't you do the same thing with mental health? You pray that when you connect with the therapist, that this person is going to help you on your journey to healing, because it's impacting you physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
And there's nothing wrong with there being an instance, and I mean, we did just touch on this, but there's nothing wrong with being an instance of having somebody be a bridge to somebody else.
Yes.
No, it's not fun to retell your story, but getting into the right chair, the right space, the safety of a positive relationship, and then reaching the empowerment of knowing who you are, navigating through your traumas, and being able to communicate more effectively and advocate for yourself. It transcends the clinical setting,
Mhm.
for individuals who have trouble standing up for themselves at work. Or, I mean, if you need to ask for a, a promotion, not a, you wouldn't ask for a promotion, but like a raise,
Mhm.
and you still haven't addressed not being able to talk to your father about your needs. Like, these are the things that can be worked out
Yeah.
in therapy or in counseling or whatever mental health avenue you address. And then the spiritual component, to me, there's an opportunity, whether it's consciousness or not, in my field, there's an opportunity for a soul retrieval, which, we drop parts of ourselves and parts of our soul all over the globe, and we leave them with people, situations, all kinds of things. And I mean, on a weekly basis, there's probably 5 to 6 people in my office who come in, having dissociated from a part of themselves.
Mhm.
And we make attempts to bring it back. And then, if it comes back, awesome. And then the continued, really the balanced journey would be what, working with a mental health practitioner to reintegrate that person, that part of yourself back into your everyday life, because they've been gone for a while. So you may be emotional, you may be triggered very easily, you're going to be in a very tender place. And so what we're talking about is the 360-degree view. Now, to drive it back home to indigenous and enslaved peoples, you know what I think that they had in combination with chanting, praying, burning whatever herbs were relevant for them at the time, applying salves. They also had the genuine care of their community, which
Yes.
I don't know, but I feel like theorizing that this is where
Or
mental health professionals came out of. When you don't have your community,
mhm.
your mental health professional can operate as a minor surrogate with boundaries, right? I mean, you're not calling them at midnight, girl, this thing just happened, I don't know what to do. You're not doing that, because you shouldn't. But in the same vein, what does your community offer you? A safe place to talk, a place to be yourself, someone who genuinely cares about you. And, if you're dealing with elders or ancestors, hopefully the wisdom to move forward on what your needs are.
Right. That's true. Because yeah, it came from somewhere. It came from a need, and you think about how many families were ripped from each other,
Mhm.
and and then also to some of the mistrust within those communities, because it was like, well, somebody sold me out. So then
Right.
it's like, who can I go to for that? And I think there are people who it's a uh intuitive field for many of us. I say it's a God-given gift. I say I just went to school to legitimize what was inside of me all along.
Absolutely.
And I have an aunt, she will tell you, she's like, I remember when you came to Detroit, you were 10 years old and you had your hands on your hips and you were advocating, talking about women's rights, and I was looking at you. And then she said, and here you are a social worker. Why? I am not surprised.
Right.
So, so there's that. And then there's other people who have had life experiences. And some will say, a social worker saved my life,
Mhm.
or somebody in this field. And then they said, so I said, I think I want to give back that way. And no matter what your reason, um, you are in a special place to spiritually help someone reconnect. There are people who have lost a lot and question, um, if there is anything out there, and if
Right.
it is, what did they do to deserve, all of these bad things that are happening to them? And sometimes being able to, as a therapist, being able to meet them where they are with no judgment, can
Mm.
actually be the thing that catapults them back to spirituality and finding themselves, and being more rooted spiritually than they were before.
Absolutely. And so what I can what I can tell from this conversation of where did therapists, mental health practitioners come from, it's like one of the many hats that your medicine person, your curandissimo, your medicine practitioner in the village is one of the many hats they would wear. Or the patriarch, not the patriarch, but the matriarchs of the family, um, in tribal settings, they would wear these hats as well. And then it became somewhere down the road it became an official field. And as far as having people available for you, I'm reminded of how often people come into my practice and they ask me, like, who showed up for me, which spirit guide was it, were my ancestors here, were my relatives, and those sessions, you can never, there's no such thing as dial a dead, like you can't pull people through spiritually, that I mean, you can invite, but will they show up? Who knows?
Right.
But whoever shows up is usually very appropriate, and it becomes this opening and emotional experience for most. And you're right, Palisa, like when we know that we are advocated for on some level, I mean, and I guess in my practice, it's more, they show up, they maybe deliver a message, but more than anything,
Mhm.
I'm watching these ancestors, grandmothers, grandfathers, what have you. I'm watching them carry away painful energy, or
Mhm.
generational curses, and to ease the life of the person that's being worked on, because they benefit as well. But then to partner that with a mental health professional who has your best interest at heart is something that can't be measured as far as healing is concerned. It can't be quantified.
Mhm.
And I think that when we harken back to the subject matter, these invitations of our ancestors, our loved ones that are beyond the veil, that was through the chanting, the singing, the dancing. You were revving up the energy
Mhm.
in order to partner with these disembodied energies. And what they didn't know was that they were working with the vagus nerve, that they
Mhm.
were balancing their chakras, is the popular thing nowadays, or that that sound healing was vibrating their kidneys and their liver into places
Yes.
where, certain imbalances could be corrected. They had no idea, but they did know the response. And I think what we can look at is, in any treatment, am I getting the response I was looking for? And then move from there. But I think there's an important piece of needing a mental health practitioner to have that conversation with. You know, interestingly enough, I have a lot of mental health practitioners that refer folks to me, and we have this symbiotic relationship
Mhm.
where, their therapist is like, okay, well, this is what we're talking about here. And then they come to me and I'm like, yep, that seems right in alignment with these things. And, so let's chant and drum, and I can give you an hour and a half when your therapist can only give you 20 minutes. And, we could do all the
Mhm.
crazy stuff in my shop. You can talk about it with them and ultimately find balance in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just creating that space. So as therapists, we know we're supposed to um create a space for clients to come in and talk openly about their faith, whatever it may be, spirituality wise, and not be judgmental and not project our stuff onto them.
Right.
And so, some of the things that we have to do also is be self aware of our own biases
Hmm.
when it comes to spirituality and faith. And then also, too, like, and what we don't know. Somebody tells me, brings up, many years ago, somebody mentioned the Baha'i faith, and I was like, "How do you spell that?" Wrote it down, and I asked them to tell me more about it. And then after that, I went and I pulled it up and I looked, and I was like, "Wow!" And then, but I wasn't, and I made sure that I let the therapist who was taking the case know this is a very important aspect for this client. Here's the
Hmm.
information I got, but I need you to also get your own, do your own research. And that's also honoring who people are.
Right.
And even when we talk about cultural competency, which is another area of mine that I feel very strongly about, is they'll say that, like, if you're working with um, a family from the Caribbean, and they say use the term juju, like, or African. If they use the term juju, like, you as a provider, you're supposed to know that has to do with the curse. Somebody put a hex on somebody. Like,
Right.
if somebody's saying that and you're like, and if you don't know, ask.
Right. It's
And
simple.
it's very simple. I said, sometimes people are like, how do you know what you know? And I said, I ask. And it's it's just one of those things. I know sometimes I might seem like I present like I know it all, but it's only because I ask and then I go further. Then I come back and ask more questions because I genuinely want to know.
Right.
And some of that comes from, the nerd in me that just likes having all this knowledge. And then the other part of me who knows how it feels better when you know someone has taken out the time to get to
Mm,
know who you are, where you come from, and how that impacts how you're functioning right now.
absolutely. And, you know, this goes right back to trust and everything that we talked about before. And it makes me think about when people ask questions like, how do you connect with your spirit guides and things like that? It's the exact same process. It's, oh, this I feel this, I have these inklings, let me research further, let me, dive deeper. And what a treasure to have that done for you as a human being. Like, somebody is genuinely interested in what makes you tick, what makes you you. And then, is it something that you want to amplify, or is it something that maybe you didn't realize was taking away from you? It's caused you
Mm,
obstacles and barriers. And, you know for everything that you said of cultural competency in mental health, it is absolutely essential in the healing field as well. To I'm fortunate to have clients that span many different backgrounds, from spiritual to religious. And no, I don't always talk to my, Christian clientele about the angels that are around them because they don't want to hear about
Right, right.
they're perfectly comfortable being like, you know what, I feel love. Great. I'm not going to tell you that it's,
And you're
Archangel
like, oh,
Michael
it's
keeping
right.
you safe, or, you know, Oshun empowering you for the conversation that you have to have. And we're not going to have those conversations. But if I wasn't culturally competent, I could be causing injury. Like there was a time in my practice. I'm so glad you brought this up because it's making me think of so many different things. There's a time in my practice where I was saying the Lord's Prayer. And my affiliation with that is I grew up Catholic, and I know the power of prayer, and I know the power of that prayer in particular because it's been said for eons. So that
Right.
is the power of it, is that so many people have said it, so many people have recited it, and so it's very energized for some very specific purposes. Anyway,
Mhm.
and then having a Buddhist client on my table. Now they're open minded, but wanting to create a safe space and honor the individual that they were. I just didn't use the prayer. I used another practice, and it didn't take away from the session. And so I think
Mhm.
that this conversation of cultural competency is so important, and it goes back to what did our ancestors do to deal with their challenges, because it also invites a conversation about how Christianity merged with some of those original concepts, and is it something that we desire to keep, or is it something that we desire to evolve?
Mhm.
Prayer is not bad, but when it is only to a white-bodied individual on a cross, maybe we could have a larger conversation and
Mhm.
take the deeper dive. I think that there is a fear to dive deeper because it would undo so much, but it would mean so much more.
But it's also hard to, if you've lived your life believing that this is the way it's supposed to be, and here comes somebody dropping this information that makes you question every ounce of your existence. And I think that's the other issue sometimes when people are trying to help people to see things from a different way. They're
Mm,
not taking into perspective the fact that this may be this person's entire identity, and you just ripped it to shreds in your
that's
effort
dramatic.
to, you know, teach them something new, and you're surprised that they're cussing you out or they walked out the room. And
Right.
it's like, no, it's there's a different way. You have to honor where they're coming from, and
Absolutely.
you cannot force it. And that's the same thing goes with mental health. When people are trying to get people to get into it, it's the where's the resistance coming from?
Right.
Is it fear based? Is it, again, the stigma? Is it, yeah, okay, so you want me to pay somebody to just sit there, talk to me, and listen? That's why I got you as my wife, or that's why I have my pastor, or, and it's like, actually, no. And so the challenge that we're running into now is, I'm very happy at how the media, like things like Housewives of Atlanta, they've really been encouraging therapy and everything else. But I'm like, the same therapist doesn't treat like seven friends. There's a
Right.
conflict of interest there. So like there's some of those things that are coming up now that make it a little too much of a novelty. And
Mm,
it's like, no, the things that I do with my clients, it's psychotherapy.
right.
It's, we're not just looking at the leaves to see why they're not green anymore. We're trying to figure out what's wrong with the soil
Right.
that's ultimately going to kill the tree.
Absolutely. And you know, it's that this is where I think healing and spirituality and mental health kind of um, eh, bridge is it's supposed to be client led.
Mhm.
Unless that person says like, "Hey, I'm ready to undo what I know of religion and how I was raised," it's not a topic at hand. Unless they're like, "I want to know what angels are present," it's not a topic to have a conversation about.
Right.
You know, that person may not believe in past lives, but you saw six of them. And it's funny knowing psychotherapists, counselors, mental health professionals that are sitting in session and they can see a past life of an individual, or intuitive information starts coming, and you guys have to do this dance of like, all right, well, that's not what they're here for, but
Mhm.
it's not unimportant information.
Mhm.
You may start to see traumas through those
Yes.
lives.
And so sometimes, what, like with social workers, we have things that we call like genograms and eco maps. And genograms look at generational stuff and making connections with trauma and everything else. So that is kind of a way that I think the field realized we have to make connections that go beyond just the family unit. So it's interesting you say that, because it is something. Um, I know that I've met people when they've come into my office, and I just start saying things,
Yeah.
and I say, I know that you, and they're like, how do you know? And I say, I don't know. I can't tell you why I know this, but it just came to me. And then like they get emotional. And I think it's one of those, whomever was out there for them is like, I need you to pass this message on to them, because I want them to stay in counseling. They need this support right now. So whatever it is I end up saying connects with them, and then
Hmm.
they stay. So I also realized that, I am a conduit for people who maybe have put off going to therapy, went and didn't go back. I've said things like, Black man, please, I want you here. Your child wants you here in this world. So you tell me what you need from me to help you with this process to come to therapy.
Wow.
I've literally said that because something inside of me is like, he is not going to come back. Like, you have to have a conversation with him in a way that you haven't had with somebody else.
Hmm.
And risky maybe. You'd be like, I don't know you. What you mean, Black man? But it didn't go that way. It was like, okay, okay, I'm coming back.
But you trusted that intuition that's so necessary. It's necessary. Intuition is necessary for every field of life: parenting, work, home, family, navigating life. It's not something that can be separated. I mean, yes, folks will try. They'll say, oh, well, I'm not intuitive. I'm not a psychic. I'm not this. I'm not that. And those are labels. But if you have ever had an inkling that you followed or you didn't, and there was a result, that was intuition. And what a beautiful opportunity to have someone like you who is so aware, self-aware, even, that you can have that instance in the middle of a practice. So one of the things that I would love to hear from you as we wrap,
Okay.
so we started out with, what did enslaved and indigenous people do to address their mental health during their atrocities, during their lives, things like that? And we've kind of touched on different things. What does Palisa
I
do?
knew you were going to say that.
Your intuition told you. What is it that you find most helpful? Give me like top three. Not to put you on the spot, because I know there's a lot.
Oh, there's so many. And you asked a Libra to like narrow it down to three. Oh, gosh.
Girl,
Um,
my moon is in Libra. We make decisions.
um, what do I do? Oh, you know, um, I'm a positive person. So I'm realist, but I'm positive. So anytime that negative voice or negative thought tries to creep in,
Mhm.
um, that that other side, and this is actually something I do with clients all the time, like, I'm able to challenge that thought with the other stuff, and
Okay.
the reminders of like, this is a setback. However, let's be reminded of all the ways that the universe showed you that this great thing is about to happen, or like, you are supposed to do this or you're destined for this. So that's one of the biggest things, is just the reminders. Like, I got to hurry up and cast that out.
Mm,
Um, I initially wasn't a meditator, but I've become one, especially like in dealing the last 2 years with a lot of my health stuff. I used meditation to help with pain management,
mm,
and it worked. It's amazing because I'm not really, I if I can avoid pain meds, I will. So, like, using that and seeing the positive result then also helped me with my prayer practice as well. So, that combination of meditation and prayer is a big thing for me. And um, I just have a core group of friends who each serve a different purpose in my life, and loving on me and holding me accountable in a unique way, and family too. So, like, that combination of that friend who knows I might not say, like, I need help, but just will happen to call me, say, "What's going on? Like, why is she calling me right now?" And then just kind of I was just thinking about this. She's like, that must be why I was compelled to call you right now. So, having that tribe. So those are the three top things. And there's a lot more. I cook a lot. Um, and then I actually, so with the cooking, and anybody who watches this today, a lot of you are friends with me personally, know me professionally. Everybody knows I cook. And somebody pointed out to me how mindful cooking is, because I am a cook from scratch person. So here I am using these bright colored food, red,
mm,
green, yellow, red bell peppers, the spices. So I'm getting to see things visually, smelling things, I'm tasting things. The food is simmering. So, and yeah, so then I end up hitting all five senses in just cooking.
nice.
So sometimes, somebody will hear me like, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm cooking." Like, "You're supposed to be resting." I'm like, "Remember, I enjoy cooking. It's not some people don't really like it. So it's not taxing for me. It's like then I'm like, "Okay, so who's going to eat all this?"
Well, and even in hitting all five senses, for every physical sense, we have a spiritual sense. So you are doing so much more. I mean, I know you already know this, but for our audience, just to understand the depth of even that practice, the mindfulness, it's a meditation in cooking. So you're bringing that home and bringing that into a different space of your life for healing purposes. And again, then uh, taking it even further to connect with your ancestors who did the same. And
Yeah.
I'm sure they're whispering in your ear, add this, do that.
I absolutely. And I was my second middle name, Afrakuma, I was named after my paternal grandmother, and I didn't have a relationship with her. I met her
Mm.
once, and then she passed away. But all of my cousins, you can ask them, they're always like, they nicknamed call me grandma, because they're like, I have so many, and my dad says it too. I have so many mannerisms like my grandmother, and the cooking. So I never got to enjoy her cooking, but my cousins and my siblings, my dad, they're like, you cook like your grandmother. So I absolutely believe she's right there, in some way, like, add a little more of that. So if somebody's like, "Why'd you add that?" I don't know. Didn't it taste better afterwards?
Right. What was the result? What was the
Yeah.
result?
Yeah.
So and that, if that doesn't summarize the conversation of what did enslaved people and indigenous people do to address their mental health, I don't know what else does, because they were listening to those whispers too. They were
Mm.
listening to those things that kept them anchored throughout their processes. And then it evolved over time. So I just want to say thank you to you, Palesa, for joining me only a year later our initial
Right.
conversation. But this has been fantastic. I know we'll have you back on.
I would love to come back.
Uh, you know, folks, comment, post, like, subscribe, do all the things, and check us out next time on Divine Dialogue with Dahlia. We will see you again next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.